This is Talking Hardcore, the podcast for people who love hardcore history.
You study history because it allows us to understand the present and prepare for the future.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare or Greek tragedy.
Could you imagine what was in the Library of Alexandria?
I bet it was porn.
I'm not even wearing pants right now, Scott.
What's the old Clint Eastwood line? A man's got to know his limitations. I know my limitations.
The Talking Hardcore podcast is presented by Ace Industrial Solutions. Are you in need of skilled trade professionals for your next project? Look no further.
Hi, everybody. It's George and Scott from Talking Hardcore. We're back. It's been a couple of months since we dropped an episode. We had some technical difficulties that required us to scrap a couple things that we recorded. We think we've got all that sound issues aired out, and we're joined today by author Matt Bella. And we're going to get back on track with putting out regular episodes. Pretty soon we're going to do a Punic Wars, Punic Nightmares episode, and look for that soon. But today we're doing a current events episode. And we're talking about a history topic that came up in current events within the last 2 weeks. And it was, well, we'll jump into it. But the format we're going to do today is Scott has no idea what we're going to talk about. So we're going to explain to him the current event that we're talking about, and then we'll break it down and give our thoughts. Matt's got an informed opinion on everything here too. So, okay. Long awaited, anticipated, much anticipated. We're here today to talk about, sorry, it's weird to get back in the flow. We haven't talked on these mics in like 2 months, so it is feel weird to get back on the flow. So anyway, it's good to be back. Thanks for tuning in.
It's the same.
Okay, so a couple weeks ago, Martyr Made podcast host Daryl Cooper was on Tucker Carlson, and they got into a lot of different things about history and the Martyr Made podcast. And during the course of that conversation, they got into World War II, and Martyr Made the argument that World War II, a lot of the blame for World War II happening falls on Winston Churchill. Friend of the podcast, Winston Churchill. I think you can go back in our old episodes and find some very enthusiastic support for Winston Churchill on both our parts.
We took him back.
We took him back, and I want to get that bias right out in the way and right out at the beginning. So you're not going to... You'll definitely understand that I have a personal bias. I'm a big fan of Winston Churchill. I don't want to try to hide that. Okay. So Matt, who's listened to Martyr Made podcast for a long time, is a big fan. So he knows a lot more of his work. I haven't actually listened to any of the other episodes. Now, before we jump into the actual arguments about Winston Churchill, I would like to say that I listened to the whole conversation with Tucker. Okay. And I came away thinking I think he's wrong, but I didn't come away thinking he was a bad actor. He was engagement farming, or he was a Nazi, or he was a fascist. Wait, Martyr Made. Okay. Daryl Cooper is his name.
Gotcha.
He also hosts a podcast with Jocko Willing.
Okay.
Called Unraveling.
Yep.
But I haven't listened to that. Matt's checked it out. He says pretty good. I listened to the whole episode, and so you see a lot of hot takes, all far right, alt-right, fascist, Nazi, defending Hitler, says Churchill's the cause of World War II. And I didn't come away thinking that. I came away thinking he was trying to come up with an alternate history that suited his take and his beliefs in the modern world, but I don't think he was pro-Hitler. And I think it was honest.
Okay.
And I don't think he's a terrible person. And there's a lot of takes on Twitter that, why is Tucker Carlson putting this fascist on? Why is he putting this anti-Semite on? Why is he putting, this neo-Nazi on? And I did not get that opinion from listening to the podcast with Tucker. I think maybe he could have done a little better of saying, also, I think that was bad. He didn't say that a lot, okay? But he also didn't say he thought it was good. The Holocaust was good or any of that stuff. So there's a nuanced argument here. Like, you don't need to. Well, anyway, Matt, do you want to go over his argument that he makes about Winston Churchill? Do you feel comfortable articulating that?
Yeah, a bit more. Yeah, a bit more than I did when I first listened to it, because I've listened. So first of all, yeah, I forget exactly how I discovered Daryl Cooper, but it was somewhere in my history podcasting ventures, and sooner or later I did subscribe to his subscriber feed, which includes his Substack, but I don't spend any time on there, unfortunately, because I think there's some cool stuff going on. But it's a lot of extra content on his subscriber feed, and I honestly have to kind of justify how I spend my money, and I consider his subscriber feed to be categorized under education in my budget. It's that good, that important to me. I think people call him a historian, and we can get into like people calling him that, but I consider him to be his work to be historical sociology, because he doesn't just like, here's what happened. He does a lot of that too, but he'll like his series on the Jim Jones and the People's Temple brings you through a massive tour of the counterculture of the 60s and all the events that set it up. So it's much more than that, than just telling a story about some of the historical events. It's more analysis.
Would you say he's very similar to Dan Carlin?
I mean, I think there are episodes of his that are comparable to Hardcore History, and I think he kind of takes that, that approach. He's expressed a lot of appreciation for Dan's work, and he's a big fan. They had a public row a while back, but according to Daryl, like, they settled it, and it was all because of Twitter stuff, you know what I mean? Which is, we can get into that as well. But yeah,
Dan
so
Carlin called him a fascist.
Yeah, right, yeah. So I have listened to everything that Daryl Cooper has ever produced in his podcast. His normal feed, his subscriber feed, some of it multiple times. So yeah, I was excited to hear him kind of be on a more mainstream thing and get out there. So let me just address kind of the things that are going on, because I don't have Twitter. I don't pay attention to anything that's going on out there in the Twitterverse or the normal world of social media or anything like that. I've heard some stuff in the news and this and that. And it even kind of bled through into my community, but I don't engage with politics much there anymore. So I'll just go with what you said right there first, with the fascism and the anti-Semitism and stuff like that, and then we can get into Churchill. So let's just boil down to those first three comments, whatever, Nazi sympathizer, anti-Semite, fascist, into one word, anti-Semitism. So I would entreat. So first of all, there's this. When you talk about incredibly sensitive topics involving horrific people like Hitler or Hamas, because he did an entire series on the history of early Zionism and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's called Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem. It's immense. It's profound. It's encyclopedic. It's very passionate. It's very informative. And he has a lot of people calling him from both sides, expressing their appreciation. I listened to that entire series twice. So first of all, with the Jewish side of things, let's call it out. I would entreat. So when you talk, okay, I'm sorry, let me zoom out. When you talk about like very sensitive subjects involving horrific people, you can kind of set up, and I'm quoting Sam Harris here because he commented on this, invited Daryl, didn't he declined, but this is Sam Harris's words. You can set up kind of like a rhetorical bomb, okay? That's what Sam Harris called it, and I'm going to use that term, a rhetorical bomb. It's like, and if you don't at a certain point in that conversation say, by the way, I think Hitler is a bad guy, you have not diffused that his rhetorical bomb, okay? Daryl didn't do that, and he addressed that later on. Okay, he addressed that later on by using Hamas. He said, when I did the Palestinian-Israeli series, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about how bad Hamas is, because everybody knows how bad Hamas is. They put suicide bombers on buses. Like, I'm not going to spend the time on that.
He's not worried about placating the political correct virtue signals. Well, not just that. It sounds like from what I mean, it sounds like he assumes that any listener has a a modicum amount of knowledge going into the subject, right?
I
But
agree with
then
both those. I agree
you
with both those
open
statements.
yourself up to being called a dog whistler, sure, or something like that. If you don't, and that's unfortunate. But anyway, okay, yeah.
And so let's
go ahead,
dig
Matt.
into the anti-Semitism thing. So anybody who wants to call Daryl Cooper a fascist or an anti-Semite or a Nazi sympathizer or a Holocaust denier, I would entreat them to listen to the man attempting to control his voice and literally weeping on the air when he is reading the personal testimonials of Holocaust survivors. And
that's in the Palestine.
No, that's in some of his more
episode?
recent stuff. That's in some. So immediately after the Tucker interview, he put something on his subscriber feed called "My Response to the Mob," and he's building up to his new series, which is called "Enemy: The Germans' War," which is World War II from the Germans' perspective. Okay. He says, Scott. He said you heard this in Tucker, George, but Scott. He says he never starts a series until he can understand the situation from both sides. Okay. So
that's a good philosophy.
Yeah. And he said the one time he failed in that when he was writing the Anti-Humans episode, which, George, if you want to like jump into one of these that's most like a hardcore history episode, I'd say is the Anti-Humans. And it would also help to explain his views on communism, about which he was severely passionately against.
Yes.
And there's another thing there it's complex. So there's that. So people just don't know what they're talking about when they hear. So first of all, you have an undiffused rhetoric bomb, and then you have somebody poking around in the founding myth of the American Empire, and here on Talking Hardcore, you guys and I myself as well like to make historical comparisons to modern day events. You know what I mean, right? So when I heard him say that, and I've heard him say it a few times, so it kind of resounded with me in this form. So like poking around with the American founding myth, right, with the Second World War, is kind of like a Roman citizen in the 1st or 2nd century AD criticizing the principles of the Aeneid.
Right.
So there's just that comparison to think about. So you have these emotional biases about these players, FDR, Churchill, you admitted this yourself. I did before too. I'm not saying I hate Churchill now, but I have a clearer view of what's going on. In the Tucker Carlson interview, Daryl Cooper is a long form storyteller. All right. He, you ask him a question, he's going to say like, okay, 400 years ago. And he likes to say stories don't start in the middle, which is something that I say, and I've said it on your podcast as well, stuff like that. So it's something I took from him. So when you are sitting across the table from someone and they're asking you questions and they're like, okay, and now next, you don't get time to fully flesh out your idea. Since then, he has been on a couple more podcast interviews, and he says he doesn't like doing interviews anyways. He really doesn't do them at all. But he did some for his friends following this incident, so he could just like hang out with them because they asked him to. You know what I mean? So he's going to explain this much more long for him. And he talked about like, I don't do good in interviews. I jump around. I left points unfinished. So and he was able to explain all this a bit more. So just regarding Churchill.
Well,
go
1 second.
Go ahead.
Pause. I don't think that was the problem in the Tucker interview, to be honest. I think he made his points fairly clearly.
Cool.
I understood them,
cool.
but I think he missed some key things. That's all.
So I won't. So I'll no longer make excuses. That was just my little
no. That's fine.
Because
I don't think
because
of making excuses. Again, Matt, that's just context.
Right?
That's context. And if he feels that way, then that might mean that he could better make himself understood.
Right.
But
that's
I didn't have any problem making his point, understanding his point.
Right.
But
that's what
I think even if you steelman his argument, which we'll get to, even if you steelman his argument to give it the best possible chance to be right, I still think it's wrong. I think he misses key factors. But anyway, let's jump into...
Let's definitely get into that. And let's just dive right into Churchill. So I want to... I want to address this by, again, another public context for I want to preface this by, again, another public context for this, which is a recent Lex Friedman episode where he had a specialist in communism on there, and he asked
link in the description if you haven't checked out Lex's
oh my God,
conversation with this communist historian.
Absolutely.
A historian of communism, not a communist historian. Okay, those are two different things, right? Yeah. Holy crap, was that a great conversation, Scott? 3 hours.
Really
this guy is so knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Listen to it when you're driving.
I'll fall asleep.
No, not while you're driving.
No, I will fall asleep.
This guy's great. This is like
an
interview.
I love both you guys, and I appreciate what
Lex is better than he used to be.
No,
you haven't checked in on Lex in a couple of years.
No, it's
his interviews. No, it hasn't. His interview style is much better. He was dry. No, but he's not anymore.
So he's not monotone?
No.
All right.
Now he laughs. He smiles. He actually asks and makes jokes. It's not near as dry as he was at the beginning. The guy's done 300 and some interviews.
But when you talk like this the whole time.
Yeah, but he doesn't now. That's what I'm saying. Give it a try. He's definitely gotten better as an interviewer.
All right. Well,
I really think he's gotten better. I mean, he had Trump on it. That was fascinating. Fascinating.
It's funny. Elon had him on too.
Yeah.
He got Trump to admit that he lost the election.
Yeah.
Anyways,
it was fascinating.
So on there, Lex Friedman, who I greatly admire, I love him, I listen to him all the time, whatever. So he asked two questions. He said recently Daryl Cooper was on the Tucker Carlson podcast, and he made some statements. So I'd like to respond to these. One, and the first one, what he said that Winston Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Okay?
No.
That's exactly what he said.
No,
that's
he
exactly
said
what he said.
A chief villain.
No.
Not
he said
the.
He said the.
Oh, Lex said the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very important.
Daryl did not.
Yes,
he was
correct.
very specific. He said a chief villain.
And he said a lot more than that. So let's just dive into this.
Right,
so,
but that was I think it's important to be clear.
It is.
Daryl said
and so
a,
Lex actually
not the.
And Lex actually and the context is everything, that one word.
Yeah,
so,
but that one word, it's tough.
Yeah.
Because he does spend a lot of time blaming most of the war on Churchill.
So let's talk about that. So I just want to go back to the Lex thing real quick. So again, misrepresented the man's statements and fed into this huge hoopla. Okay, right, but it matters, and I'll tell you why.
Yes, but barely.
Right. So Daryl Cooper said that he was in a conversation with his friend Jocko Willink, who is a passionate fan of Churchill, such as yourself, George, and he was poking at him a little bit, and he said, you know what, I think Winston Churchill is, actually the chief villain of the Second World War. And he said he did that to antagonize him a little bit, whatever. But he actually backed it up with a lot of stuff, and he's done so even more so since then in a couple other podcast interviews that he's been in. So it doesn't matter. It's about the way the war was prosecuted, and it's about the way that the Nazis' peace offerings were rebuffed and reacted to with aggression and mockery. And it's about the way the war could have been mitigated along the way, and perhaps even large portions of it prevented. And if fewer people could have died because of the way that the Allied situation as handled by Churchill.
Right. Okay. Now pause, Matt.
Was operated.
I think that is the crux of the point that he made. Now, I don't think we need to get into the details, because I know, and I'm probably stepping on your toes because I know you did a lot of reading about this. I don't think you need to get into the details of whether or not he's right about that, because I don't think it matters. Okay, whether or not he's right that if Churchill hadn't been in charge, if somebody else would have been there, they could have, Britain wouldn't have went to war with Germany, and that would have saved a lot of lives from World War II. I honestly don't think is the point. And I don't think it matters.
Well, yeah, but there was a whole lot of rhetoric during that time about appeasement.
And that's what he's attacking. Basically, when it gets down to it, Daryl Cooper here, and Tucker Carlson especially, this is his thing now, is he's very much anti-war and anti-American. He's very much American isolationist. Okay. Tucker spends a lot of time in that interview basically saying Neville Chamberlain was right, or implying that Neville Chamberlain was right. just like on right about what appeasing Hitler.
Oh,
Okay, like that was the right strategy. And he talked about on Rogan how talked about on Rogan how using the nuclear weapon was evil. Okay. Tucker has taken a stance lately, and I don't know, maybe always, I don't know, I haven't followed him for a real long time, where he is very much set himself against the military industrial complex and the neocons and the warmongers. Okay. And would like to see America as isolationists. Okay. And so the attack on Hitler is really just an attack on meddling in the affairs of other countries. Okay. And that's what they're implying that that's what Churchill was doing by declaring war when Hitler went into Poland. Is they're meddling in the affairs of things that didn't concern them. Okay, Matt, do you think that's accurate?
About the West meddling in affairs of things that didn't concern them?
Like Churchill, Churchill meddling in,
not
declaring war because Germany invaded Poland.
So, well, I mean, Britain and Poland were allies, so you have to do something, right? But at a certain point...
But I think that Daryl Cooper would argue that, you didn't.
I don't think, it's not exactly that. It's not that simple. And so we do need to get into the details a bit, but I would like to address
Go ahead.
just Churchill not being in charge at all. So Cooper even
says... Matt, hold on.
Yeah,
Scott, you got a question on your face. Ask it. You're the audience here.
Sure, but
you didn't listen to these. That's the whole point.
Sure, but I mean, what I wonder what Daryl's argument would be. Like, okay, so if Germany invaded Poland, well, what's to stop Germany from invading? I don't know, France right after.
Right.
Which they did anyway.
We're going to get into the details. Yeah, we're going to get into the details of it. Okay. So first of all, the Churchill thing about him just being in charge. Cooper even says like, it's not even about Churchill because he was really just enacting British policy, and blaming Churchill for all of this is like blaming George Bush for the Iraq war when instead should be really focusing on the entire American national security apparatus. You know what I mean? So there's that to consider. He's not just going after Churchill. It's the posture, the position of Britain. Okay. So he said even if he said no to this stuff, they would have just kicked him out and got someone else. Okay. So it's about that. So that mitigates something of this. And now let's get into the details. So Germany invades Poland. And okay, first of all, everybody has this concept because of movies that have been made and the way this is now cartoonishly represented that Hitler just wanted to take over the world. He did not. Hitler wanted Germany to exist contemporaneously with other empires of the world, including Britain.
Pause. And that's what Daryl points out. But they also glorified war and believed that humans were bettered by war and that Germany should always be at war.
I mean, that sounds kind of like America.
You say that, but not really.
No, I get what you're saying, and I think
that's what it's fun to joke, Matt. I get that as a little.
I'm not joking.
But you are because the average American thinks war is terrible. Hitler was raising all of the Germans.
You're right.
To think war was the goal.
Yeah.
But that's the real thing that Daryl got wrong that I think you can't overlook. And that's why Churchill was so adamant in the 30s that Hitler had to be was going to be an enemy that you couldn't stop, that you had to stop, is because he was taking this nation that had all this potential and focusing all their efforts on becoming the most militant population possible. Now, there's no effing way that you're not going to end up at war with him. And if you wait until they're stronger, you're screwed. Okay? And that's my argument. That's why I think Cooper's wrong in the first place, is because you have to fight him eventually, because there's no effing way Hitler's going to be cool with Britain being another empire.
Except for
it doesn't show.
Except for
unless they kowtow to him.
Except for he continually said that they were.
But why would you believe him? He's also a liar, a habitual liar. He also
said
he would.
So is Trump, and you have
politicians always lie.
And you have continually said yourself, George, that like all these dictator statements about Trump, that people are coming up with them. You said to me personally, but he's never said he's going to do that. So like it's a double standard there.
No, it's not, though, because I'll explain the difference. We have a track record they had a track record of Hitler and what he would do, and he kept saying he wasn't going to do something and then doing it. So him saying
there were
he wasn't
factors
gonna
along the way.
invade, yes, of course. There's always intervening factors. But he made a secret peace deal with the Russians.
And we're going to get into that too. Let's get into
and
that
what do you
too.
do?
So
what do you do?
We're getting way ahead of ourselves. We need
I
to,
know, but this is why I think he was wrong in the first place, and it came up already. So I just want to make sure
from the beginning, because you're not listening to this from the beginning. That's why. So I don't expect to change your mind on this. And
no. We're supposed to have a discussion. So go ahead.
I don't expect to change your mind about Hitler or Churchill, but I do hope to help to clarify what Cooper was actually saying about these things, because he's unpacked it since then.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's about the way the war was prosecuted and what could have been prevented along the way. So Hitler invades Poland, okay?
Right.
Now, okay, so he didn't want to fight England, and it's even generally accepted that he didn't want to fight France, okay? And then Hitler offers up Poland back to the Allies. He said, I will give this up in exchange for the Danzig corridor, which is the only reason they went there in the first place. They just wanted a land route to the sea. And Britain, you know what I mean? The Allies said, no way, we're going to keep pressing this. We're going to keep attacking you. We are going to throw your peace offerings back in your face. And you get this whole analogy of a man trapped who is already a criminal, someone who is a bad actor, who's holding his family hostage in his apartment, and he's on drugs. And he said, I'm going to kill everybody and they keep pressing him. But it didn't, he ends up killing his family. And then you find out afterwards, he was saying, I'll come out if, and you said, nope, F you, we're going to send in the SWAT team. And
because
then sometimes
can't trust him.
Well, you can try. It's not about an absolute either or, it's about a what if. That's what the whole tone
and that's
of
what this is. And I agree with you.
Yeah.
This is a historical what if, which I think are fun.
From there. So let's move on from there. We need to keep this going chronologically.
Yeah, absolutely. 1 second, though.
Yeah.
I think a historical what if is fun. Okay?
Yeah. We love that here. And some of the first...
That's kind of what we do.
Yeah. We've talked about it on this show. And when you guys first joined the Hardcore History Discussion Discord server, link in the episode description, one of the first things we talked about long form was alternative outcomes of the Eastern Front, and we're going to get there. So now you have Hitler, who possibly would have backed down in Poland. Okay, we don't know. Maybe it could have been mitigated. The communist specialist guy pointed out that the Einsatzgruppen were already killing Jews in Poland, and that's true. There is a bigger perspective.
Horrifically.
Yeah, there's an entire perspective that the entire German war effort was to commit genocide, and that is not the case. There was a policy of elimination by starvation in the East, which was not necessarily communicated to all officers in the field, hence their confusion and resistance. I think some folks think all of the German army as the Nazis, but they were a name, but not so much in their greatest of sinister intentions.
I think that's a great point that I want to articulate a little bit more. Nuance. And we've talked about, so we had an episode on where we talked to my wife's grandmother, who suffered atrocities. Her family suffered atrocities from the Russians, and her brother was an SS who probably committed atrocities. But not all Germans were evil, and not all German soldiers were evil. But that doesn't change the fact. That doesn't change exactly. It doesn't change the fact that they committed some of the most heinous acts in human history.
They did. And to be clear, I have dived into the whole regular soldiers didn't participate in the slaughter thing. And there were accounts.
Just not true.
There were accounts which counter this, such as eyewitness testimony of ostensibly law enforcement officers in occupied territories helping.
And it wasn't just always
helping the locals
to
kill the Jews. Right, absolutely.
Yeah, it wasn't always just following orders.
You can't take it as a blanket thing. You need to break it down.
Exactly. There's nuance in every discussion, and that's what we do here. Absolutely. We believe in nuance, and we believe in hearing out other viewpoints. So that's the whole point. And that's why I wanted to talk about this in the first place, is because when you see the Twitter discussions and you see all these attacks on both sides from both directions, what you don't see is much nuance.
So two more things here, and I'm gonna get back to something you said, George, because in our private conversations you expressed kind of your opinion on this, and so this everyone knows what we're talking about. You're like, it could have been stopped, but it needed. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
But it could have been stopped or whatever, or peace or whatever, but we needed to fight anyways because the Nazis were doing atrocious things and we just needed to stop them, right? That's what you said to me.
Yeah.
So let's look at it. So yeah, go ahead, Scott.
A lot of which wasn't known of until the war was ending.
No, but a lot of people in charge knew that shit.
Some people did. Yeah,
yep.
There were people who leaked out of the camps, but it took a while, and the atrocities were covered up for a long time.
But also,
and the Russians still haven't released their actual casualty numbers from
right,
the Second World War. Yeah,
it's just crazy. But also, Churchill was speaking against Hitler in the early 30s because he knew what their ideology and what Mein Kampf said, what they actually thought.
So let's get into the invasion of Russia, because this whole thing seems to come down to
Operation Barbarossa.
Even if they settled things down in the West, Hitler still would have invaded Russia. And I really need to.
So in this counterfactual, then, okay, if Daryl Cooper's right, and Britain and France don't declare war when Germany invades Poland, and that thus Germany can focus all their efforts in the East without an invasion in the West.
This is not what that's saying.
Okay.
Let me go through. We need to pick this up again chronologically. Germany has invaded Poland. The peace offering has been made to release Poland, except for the Danzig corridor. It's been rebuffed.
Yeah, Hitler was it 39, 38?
Yeah, it's September 39. Hitler keeps making peace offerings. Churchill is sending over bombing raids, which at that time were just destroying civilian populations. And the news in Britain was saying, "We throw your peace offering back in your evil teeth." Okay, so now you're trapping this dude in the apartment. He's got his gun to his family's head, and you're not getting him anyway out, right? So all the West. So then he goes. So now he's being pressed in the West, right? He didn't want to invade the West, right? He wanted to save his forces for the East, right? So now he had to go perform a flanking, fight off his western flank, right, to secure his western flank. But he didn't want to fight like France and England. He didn't. So all that is happening, and now it's pressing him, right? So now you have.
Pause for a second. Pause for a second.
Yeah.
I think one thing that that's worth pointing out here too, that strengthens your case a little bit as well, is you can see that in the difference in the way they treated the soldiers in the West.
Dan talks about that too.
I mean, the stuff they did to the Russians.
Right. It was hatred. Yeah, it was hatred.
It was literally, they weren't human, so we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
And in the West, it was more
gentlemanly,
traditional, gentlemanly.
Dan uses the word gentlemanly. If you
as much as you can have gentlemanly in 1940, it was.
Yeah.
So there's truth to that.
You know what I think about?
As long as you weren't a Jew.
Yeah,
or a gay, or a gypsy,
or a lot of other ethnic races.
Then it became much less gentlemanly. Yeah. But if you were like a white regular dude, they were just like, okay, we beat you now, and
so
that's it.
And you know what I always think about that. I love that. I would think about that because you have troops from the East being sent over to the West to support it, and imagine some dude from the Russian front showing up in France and being like. You call this warfare?
Right. You guys have no idea what it's like. Yeah.
All right. So now the West is occupied. All right. So now you have 1 million. So this is not about whether or not Hitler would have invaded Russia anyways. It's not like, hey, they could have done this and Hitler and the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. It's not about whether or not he would have invaded, because that's in Mein Kampf, that's in his statements all along. Everybody knows that's what he was planning to do. It's not about whether or not it would have happened, it's about when it would have happened. Here we go. So the West is occupied, okay? Now Hitler has 1 million troops in the field, and you can't just send them home to go back to work because you are at war in the West. Thank you, Britain. Okay. And so you're looking to the East and you're like, why not now? This is the only way we can go. So at that point, it happens. Now, if you had peace in the West, if everything had settled down, okay, Russia would have had a couple more years to build up their defenses, making it a vastly different situation for Russia, for the Nazis to face when they invaded. Right?
I think that's right.
Wait. And in the West, all those countries would have not been occupied, allowing all the Jews and the refugees to have a safe place to free to.
Why?
So this is not about just
Pause.
very clear.
Pause.
No,
Though.
I need to conclude.
Why
this,
would
man.
Hitler have waited to
I need to
invade?
conclude this.
But why would Hitler have
So
waited to invade?
it's not about whether it would have happened. It's about when it would have happened and what it would have looked like.
But what you just said is Stalin would have time to build up. Well, Hitler wasn't a dummy. He would have definitely invaded before Stalin had time to do that. Right? That's what he would have done.
Maybe.
Well, I mean,
makes
he
sense.
wanted Russian land. And I don't see any way that he would have just gave Stalin multiple years to build up before invading. So I think that's probably a counterfactual, that doesn't work, Matt, that part of it. What you're saying is, if there was peace in the West, the only argument I think you can say is that there was peace in the West, Hitler probably would have easily won in Russia. I think there's an argument to be made there. Hold on.
That's if Stalin would have started stockpiling arms and training troops.
But he believed Hitler.
Exactly. That's why they signed their peace accord.
And then Stalin seemed like the only guy that really believed him.
Yeah.
Like, that's why Operation Barbarossa was so catastrophic and worked so well.
Well, but even if Stalin had a couple more years, he might not have done anything.
No, he would have ramped up because he was thinking them in Germany could probably
both kind of buying time
ship.
against each other. They were both kind of buying time against each other. Yeah.
Exactly. They were always going to clash, but I think the argument is
Hitler was rushed into the invasion. So
let me ask you a question.
Yeah, he was rushed into the invasion, and he would have he wanted to build up more.
I think that's a misstatement,
Stalin wanted to build up more.
I think that's a misstatement to say that because he had to fight Britain and France, he was rushed into invading Russia.
I don't
think that's accurate.
To be honest with you guys, I think that made Germany stronger because now they had the industrialization of France to help their industrialization, food. I mean, that increases their strength by taking France.
But I think it's important here.
Right.
Now I'm gonna go ahead and say
that's a good point, Scott. Germany was only relying on the resources of Germany at that point. They would have had all those industrial resources to immediately invade the vastness of the Soviet Union.
But the resources of Germany let them roll over France.
Yeah,
it was nothing.
In 6 weeks,
like it was
which was a crushed, defeated country from the
so
First
let's
World
not
War.
Pretend
and Czechoslovakia
like they
was
weren't
surrendered
already
without
a
a fight.
Fucking powerhouse.
Oh no, I'm not saying they
were a
were.
powerhouse
I'm
against
just saying
certain people, but not,
wait a minute. I'm just saying
Soviet Union.
Well, the only reason the Soviet Union it didn't work, they were a powerhouse. Look at how far they made it, but a freaking Hitler was stupid and didn't go for Moscow. That literally could be the only reason that all of Europe is still not Germany. It's because Hitler didn't just go for Moscow. He changed. Right when they were on the doorstep, he got afraid and he audibled.
He didn't get afraid.
Don't you remember that?
Well, he wasn't afraid. What
some
happened
people say he was afraid to commit the same error as Napoleon. He did
Southern tried it. The Southern attack,
but his general
stalled, and he didn't want to leave his flank open.
No, maybe.
Yeah, he didn't want it to be encircled.
It depends on who you read on this. Some people think that, right? Some people think Hitler was really just worried about repeating the same mistakes as Napoleon. His generals wanted him to go for Moscow.
Well, then
because he said, remember, they talk about this in Hardcore History, right? The generals said, we need to take Moscow. And Hitler said, well, Napoleon took Moscow and he didn't win. And they said, well, that was 100 years ago and everything's way different now. And that's accurate because modern communication, the whole war's run from Moscow now. You take Moscow and maybe it's completely different. Yep. And I think there's a good argument, at least, that's probably way different.
But once again, he didn't want to leave his flank exposed.
You say that. I don't know if there's actually a good argument that that's why.
They could have had
historically that
they could have had one of the largest pincer movements pulled on them in the history of man.
But Russia didn't have the guys.
Well, apparently they did.
They didn't.
But they did.
They didn't.
If you're stalling Kiev, if you're stalling in Kiev, okay, you're stalling the southern.
Anyway, we need.
Anyway,
we're not qualified to make this to have this argument. I am not qualified. I am not anywhere qualified about military strategy. All I know is there's at least a good chance that if Hitler took Moscow, the war is over.
Possibly.
Stalin was there.
Yeah.
If they kill Stalin, it might just be over.
Oh, I don't think Stalin would have stayed.
Maybe he couldn't have got out. We don't know. There's still a good chance the war was over if they took Moscow. Imagine if they took Paris.
Yeah.
France was done.
No, they were still, and they all the politicians and any decision makers went to Bordeaux. Sorry. They went to Bordeaux.
They took that too.
Yeah, later. It took a while.
Oh. What, another week?
They were still making decisions from Bordeaux.
Okay. I'm just saying. The idea,
I mean, with that, can I throw one thing out?
I don't think it makes sense.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
The thing that Russia has, and it just like it doesn't matter if it's China or the U.S., the thing that Russia has is space.
Yeah.
They can always go further in. So, and wait a minute. When the war first started, Stalin ordered that all of the factories be disassembled and then reassembled way out west
in Siberia.
So that doesn't mean even if you take Moscow, it still might not be over.
Right, but Hitler's plan was not to win the war against Russia right away. He literally envisioned an eternal war.
Okay,
every year they'd kill another couple million Russians and take their land, and just keep working.
Just take
every year. Yes, that was the idea, so that you got room and you got land.
And resources.
And you just keep killing Russians because you don't fucking care about Slavs. They're not human.
Yeah.
So you just keep killing them a little bit at a time and taking their space. So that's my whole point. Okay? That's the ideas that were powering the Nazi movement. So waiting to fight them, if Britain and France don't declare war after Germany invades Poland, there's a good argument that Germany probably gets stronger.
Oh,
okay. They internally strengthen themselves, keep raising super brainwashed soldiers. Okay, and then what do? Then you got to fight them later when they're stronger. And I think that's the argument. They're better. They're stronger, better equipped,
better fed.
And they're honing their troops, fighting the Russians, so they're getting stronger there. And then eventually they're going to look at France and be like, "Well, you're either going to do what we say, or we're going to invade you."
Yeah,
because that's how all of human history, how emperors and conquerors do it. Why would we expect Hitler to be different? That's what Genghis Khan would have done. Okay, yeah, he said that he would be fine with peace with Britain for now.
Sure,
but as soon as he could say, "I'm in charge now," then fuck you, then he would have. And what if they got the bomb? They were trying.
Yeah.
What if they got the bomb? What if they beat us? That's why these counterfactuals are fun. But to me, Daryl Cooper's point is it's erroneous. Hitler was a fundamentally evil person. And that doesn't mean that all Germans were. And that doesn't mean we can't understand what motivated him. Because I can. There's justifications there. I can understand what created Hitler, but also say he was evil. That's the nuance that I can see. Okay, I can understand what caused Hitler to do what he did, but also understand that what he wanted to do was atrocious and had to be stopped. And I think the whole reason that Cooper and Tucker wanted to bring this up, and this is pretty much a valid reason, is because so Cooper talks about this all the time, or in the podcast, how this is the fundamental myth of America, is that of the Western culture, is that we had to stop Hitler because he was evil. Okay, and so now we use Hitler, the bugaboo of Hitler, to invade every country we feel like. Putin is as bad as Hitler. Saddam Hussein is as bad as Hitler. Iran is as bad as Hitler, which is silly because we do that and it's wrong. So Cooper points out accurately something that we're doing that is incorrect.
Wait a minute.
Okay?
Wait a minute. Whoa. In some instances, I agree with that statement, and others I do not. So Saddam Hussein was literally murdering his own
bad dude.
population.
But
20, 30,000 people.
Traditionally bad guy. Lots of European rulers, lots of other rulers killed a bunch of their population.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying it's cool or it's okay, And I think it's good in the end that he's not in charge and that we killed him. I think those are good things. But every battle now is Hitler versus the good guys.
True. What were you going to say, Matt?
You've had the argument with people, I'm sure. Putin's Hitler. We have to support Ukraine to stop Putin from acting like Hitler. He's being Hitler.
But he's not.
I know that. I'm not arguing that argument. That's the whole point that Daryl Cooper and Tucker Carlson are really trying to make. Well, is that what Ukraine and Putin and Ukraine are doing is a traditional battle for territory. It is not a genocide. Not everything's a genocide.
That's correct.
Okay? And we use these terms like Holocaust and genocide now. Culture just throws it out for regular war, and it's not. But Germany was a fucking genocide in World War II. And that's the thing that we have to remember is that was part of their plan. It was a feature, not a bug. When they were losing the war, what did they do? They spent more money on the trains to the death camps than to try to get away or try to fight the Russians. That was the feature, not a bug. That's why that one instance we were right, but that doesn't mean that using that now in every fucking analogy is correct. It's not. There's nuance there.
Let's circle back to Churchill because we are
this is exactly what I wanted to talk about because this is the whole point of this podcast. That podcast with Cooper and Tucker, that's what they wanted to talk about.
Okay.
The whole point of that podcast was to take some air out of the sails of the neocons.
That's what Tucker wanted to talk about. Cooper said he didn't even know.
But that's why he had Daryl on.
Right.
That's why he had Daryl on because Tucker has been raging against the neocons.
Okay, but Cooper said he didn't even know that Tucker was going to ask him about the Second World War, and it didn't happen until But
you don't think Tucker knew what Cooper's opinion on Churchill was?
Okay,
when
so
he had
now we're
him
talking
on?
about Tucker Carlson, not Daryl Cooper. So I just want to
that's what I'm saying, and that was the whole point of that conversation.
Okay, great. So he got used, and then that's fine. So
no, I don't think he got used because I think Tucker and
they
Daryl
had
agreed
dinner
on
the
this
night
point.
before. Yeah.
But they agreed on that point. That's all I think. I think they both agree that the West uses the myth of Hitler or the myth of World War II to invade other countries and to fight wars.
It's a huge thing.
It is, and that's real. That's real. How many liberals have you argued with on Facebook or Twitter, Scott? I've seen them about Putin. A bunch. A bunch. Because what he's actually doing is a regular old school territorial war. It is. He wants that part of Ukraine. He's not trying to kill all the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
There's so much, right? We're going to go back to nuance. There's so much nuance.
Exactly,
George. And there's so much, and here's the problem. In this day and in this day and age, you'd think we'd have all the information necessary. And the problem is it's filtered information. So we're only catching little snippets. So, and you can ask, I guarantee you could ask 100 people and say, hey, did you know there was a coup in Ukraine in 2014? And they would say, what? What are you talking about? Right. They would have no idea there was a coup in Ukraine in 2014. Anyway, I'm not.
No, but that's my point. That's why we're not. That's the whole reason that Tucker wanted to talk about this in the first place is because he wanted to point out that what we're doing in world politics is bullshit. That's what he thinks. What we're doing in international politics. And I don't know if he's right or wrong. I don't know that we could be isolationists and everything would be hunky-dory and fine. But also, I don't think we should be funding wars all over the world. So it's tough. But Tucker is of the opinion, and he's talked about this on several other podcasts that I've heard, that basically we don't need to be involving ourselves in anybody else's wars.
And wars, no.
Right. Well, I mean, countries always do that, though.
Sure.
Right. American isolationism is a pipe dream.
In World War I, the United States. Sorry, Matt. You look.
No, you're fine. I have something to get back to whenever you finish this part.
You're making a note of it. Good.
No,
he's writing it down.
Right. I'm scratching at my table.
In World War I, the United States was basically isolationist, and I'm before World War One, before World War One,
Yeah.
and well, even during World War One,
At the beginning of it.
yeah, at the beginning, because we were supplying both sides or trying to supply.
That's
both
another
sides.
part of it, feeding both sides and making it, just killing more people. So let me
Wait a
just
minute.
get in there really.
Wait a
Let me
minute.
just
Whoa.
yeah, go ahead.
Matt, they're going to kill each other no matter what. We're
Okay.
just making $1 off of it. Like that's as
You
capitalist.
sound like a communist, Matt.
That's as capitalistic as you can
You
get,
sound
buddy.
like a communist.
We don't want nothing to do with you, but if you want to buy our goods, that's on you guys.
Hey, nothing to
I
eat.
mean, but and you know what? And we did get involved. But then in World War One.
Well, I think there's an argument, at least there is an argument that if America hadn't joined World War One, Germany would have won.
Maybe
I think the Germans thought that.
it's a
Well,
maybe
at the end of
because
the
they
Second
were
World, towards the end of the Second World War, Germany was threatening to kill all the Jews if America entered the war because they knew the lesson from World War One was that America comes in, you're done.
right.
So
Well,
we have we just circle back. We have the hostage situation again, where I think I won't argue against your point that Hitler was evil and that world domination. I have never made the case for that with Germany and the 2nd World War because I have read too much about it to think that. Honestly, their actions just don't speak to that. Okay, now eventually, does a powerful nation want more power and expand? Sure, Britain did. America does. We all do
Matt,
that.
Pause.
Answer
the question.
No. Let's just go through this. So you have an obviously evil guy, and he's holding Europe hostage. How hard do you press him? This isn't about whether or not we should have acted. It's about the actions that we did take along the way as the Allies, the things that we did that made it better and worse. And there were things that we did that made it worse, and we just need to be able to talk about them.
Yes, 100%.
That's all Cooper wants to
faults.
do without
Admit
being
the
excoriated in the press.
Yes,
that's all he wants
and
to
I
do.
think that's, and again, remember, I told you when I listened to that, I did not come away thinking that he was some kind of, propagandist or anything like that.
Cool. What are you going to say?
There is nuance there. I'm sure that Churchill made decisions that actually led to more death than needed to happen.
Way more.
That's life, right? When you're in charge.
But it's not just like I need to send these guys into a battle and they're going to get killed so we can win the battle. It's like, did the battle even need to happen in the first place, kind of thing.
Sure. But that's being.
In fact, I stopped reading The Unnecessary War because you said you could have so easily discounted it by saying that.
I wouldn't have.
Okay, that's fine.
But I'm just saying.
But that is actually a quote from
Sure.
Churchill. That book is named after a quote from Churchill that after the war he said we stuck the wrong pig. All this kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because then he saw what was happening in the Soviet Union, right?
And let me just address another thing.
I do think.
Go ahead.
1 second.
Yeah.
I think we should absolutely admit that Churchill did things that were not great.
War makes
just like dropping atomic. 1 second, like dropping atomic bombs.
War makes criminals of everyone. I mean, it really kind of does.
It makes you have to make decisions that nobody ever wants to have to make. But there's a difference between Hitler and Churchill fundamentally.
Oh, of course there is.
And
just like there's a difference between the cops and the guy holding his family hostage. It's about how you deal with them.
Right. But I think that's a bad analogy. When you use that analogy, Matt, I don't think that it holds water.
When the person kills his family, it's not your fault that they killed him.
But I don't think it's a good analogy because Hitler.
It's not your fault that Hitler killed the Jews, okay?
Hitler wasn't pinned in.
Was there anything you could have done to save that family? Was there anything that could have been done to save 100 people, to save 1,000? And this is not some big picture thing on the part of Daryl Cooper, as he's expressed peripherally to this incident. It's just about individual lives, dozens, hundreds. It's about this and that other person. And he relates very personal stories from this conflict that need not have happened were not greater decisions made.
But what I think that's armchair quarterbacking. That's the problem.
I think when you look at the actual strategies that were in play, there's huge things, and it's about what ifs of alternate history.
Exactly.
And when
because
this and that,
the results in the end were good. So
the
did
worst
Churchill
thing
make
that ever
poor decisions?
happened because of decisions that were made by the people in power.
No, the worst thing that ever happened may have been
Including Hitler,
prevented.
including
but
including
maybe
Stalin.
the worst thing that ever happened was prevented.
And
Like,
as far
we
as the
don't know-
analogy of the people
Right.
holding their family hostage, that is literally the way the Germans felt. We have that's why he's doing this.
Yeah, but
series
just
from
because
their
they felt
perspective.
that doesn't mean they were right.
That doesn't
okay.
mean they were right, but it doesn't matter if you're
Yeah.
right or wrong if that's the way you're going to
Exactly.
act. And
you
if you can
do
predict,
need to
if
take
you-
that into account. I
if
agree.
and if you can predict that that's the way someone's going to act, then provoking
Right.
them in that direction will surely lead to the guy blowing his fucking daughter's head off with a shotgun when the SWAT
Maybe.
team busts.
But that's a much simpler scenario, and that's why I said it's not a great
I think
analogy.
it expands into the greater situation of human
because
behavior.
there's too many other moving parts in a situation like this. Hitler
such
was
as
not
the
some guy.
industrial, such as
He was not weak. He was not a weak guy cornered by the police.
such as the
in his
economy of
room.
Europe being in play and Germany's decision to invade the Soviet Union and the Western and the Allies either occupy warfare there or lack of warfare there, influencing Germany's access to that. There's another thing Cooper said that you immediately called out when the day of this interview that you said you didn't agree with, which is he said. He was talking about Soviet atrocities following the Second World War, and this is a couple decades later or whatever, a few decades later, as pretty much as like the worst thing that ever happened.
Oh,
you know what I
no,
mean?
he was talking about, and I haven't even looked into this. What was it? Czechoslovakia? No, it was. He was talking about the worst thing. Romania. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it was like in 1970 something, and it was like I had never even looked into it that much. But he said it was like the worst thing that ever happened in human history.
See, he did not say that. He did not say that.
What did he say? It was something like that.
He said he was relating some of these atrocities committed by the Soviets in places around Eastern Europe and in Romania, and he said, "I think that's pretty much the worst thing that ever happened." Okay, so now let's just again look at what the guy actually said in the context of a conversation. Like, so you know what I mean? He's sitting there talking, he's like,
100%.
I think that's pretty much the worst thing that ever happened. Pretty much, So okay, so first of all.
Yeah, that's clearly an off-the-cuff statement that I would never hold him. I would never hold him to.
Right.
I just said it does seem a little flippant when you've been talking about Germany with a little bit of compassion.
Okay.
To then say that their enemy did the worst thing that's ever happened when Germany also did some of the worst things that have ever happened.
Right. So let's break this down. First of all. This is not Professor Daryl Cooper teaching a class on history saying
100%.
I am here to tell you that definitively the atrocities committed by the Soviets in Eastern Europe post Second World War were the worst thing that ever happened. Okay.
Right.
Everybody thinks about the Holocaust as well. Hello, China. Hello, communism. Are you discounting deaths? Like, there's all kinds of perspectives on this. Additionally, let me just finish up. Everybody gets to have their own perspective or their own opinion on what the worst thing that ever happened is. Like, if you have a personal opinion, if you have a personal connection to an atrocity or even a simple single murder, that's the worst thing that ever happened to you. You know what I mean? Like, So let's not blow this up too big.
No, not at all.
There's two more things. One is that he said pretty much, right, which is like places it below the Holocaust if you want to look like that.
Yeah.
But also, there's something that nobody else is considering or even talking about that I thought of. Maybe things on that scale, which this kind of was, maybe things on that scale or like that happened after the Holocaust are worse because they happened after.
When we should have known better.
Yes, thank you. Especially by the Soviets, who knew what Auschwitz looked like because they were the ones who liberated it. Humanity should have learned its lesson by then, and they still kept doing it. So that makes it yeah.
So my point is, Matt, I don't think the only thing I made that comment to you when we were talking was because what I said to you was it seemed a little strange maybe to make that argument when you just kind of somewhat discounted
again
a little bit of the evils that Germany did.
I don't think
It could at
he
least
discounted.
sound like
I
that.
don't think it.
I know, but it at
what I
least
thought
could
you were about
come
to say
off
right
that
there
way.
was that you were speaking about it in the context of the Holocaust. I don't think he discounted them at all.
Well,
and I
no,
think,
but that's still. I'm saying
so
what I'm saying is,
this could be
if you
summed up
listen to the whole
simply.
podcast, you could
This
kind
could
of
be-
come away
This could be
thinking
summed
that
up. This could be summed
maybe-
up simply is by engaging with the primary source, which means actually listening to this man's work, not just what people are saying about him.
Absolutely.
Okay,
No,
so that,
I know.
and
But
so
that's
that
what I was
means,
talking about.
that
I
means,
listened to the
that
whole
means
podcast
listening
with Tucker.
to his history of
Yeah.
talking about communism, reporting on it,
Right.
reading these stories, and
that's what I wanted to get to.
and how he thinks like he's not a fan of communism, and he will tell you. You sent me something the other day, George. You were like,
yeah,
socialism killed, or National Socialism killed these people. This many people, communism killed this many people. Why is communism still around? Okay, you know
that's
what I mean?
a great.
And it's like nobody's really talking about that. And there's, if
Well,
you're just going by
the
numbers,
only people who do are the right wing people right now,
yeah,
because the right wings see the left as
learning,
basically just basically neo-communists, and part of what Tucker was doing here, and I think maybe Daryl Cooper too, was trying to highlight's not the right word. If you can change the World War II thought so that the Soviets are the bad guys and not the communists, or not the Nazis, or at least predominantly the bad guys, or more bad guys than they are traditionally thought of, then you can maybe get modern people to see some of the flaws of communism. That's my thought. There is so much, and Matt, you're not on Twitter, so you don't see this. There is so much talk now on Twitter, and just in general on right-wing stuff about the evils of communism. And I think that's important. Like, that stuff's not taught. At least it wasn't.
No. The other thing is, first, we need to apologize to Elon. It's X.
No, I'm just whatever.
No, it's Twitter.
I don't
It's
think he cares.
Yeah.
Twitter, X, I don't think he cares.
It's X.
He can call whatever he wants.
Did you see? This is hilarious. So when he changed it to X from Twitter, Stephen King posted, who's like super liberal and really a wacky Twitter follow. This guy says some bonkers shit. Okay. The author, Stephen King. Okay. He posts on there, Twitter. You can't make me call it X. Then the other day he posted a post and called it X, and it was trashing Elon when he called it X, and Elon just posted, "You called it X."
Oh my God!
You called it X. And it was just funny.
I don't think Stephen King.
It was just funny. I think it's funny. But the point is, look, I think part of the reason that Tucker wanted to talk about this stuff is because he wants to highlight that, hey, the Soviets were almost as bad or just as bad as the Nazis. Communism is as bad as Nazism, and it is in practice. If it's not in theory, in practice it is.
Okay. So
And that's the reason that's the agenda behind Tucker wanting to talk to Daryl Cooper and bring these things up. It was against the neocons and against the communists. Okay.
I think we should have an episode. And I'm going to be. We have to highlight. I think a good episode would be highlighting the pros and cons of communism.
No.
Yes.
No.
I think that'd be a good episode.
I don't
Because
I think we've already done that.
Well, one thing I'd like to remind everybody, Stalin knocked out the teeth of and tortured his generals.
Yeah.
But Hitler didn't do any of that.
No, because he didn't have the same kind of power as Stalin.
I'm just saying he did.
Let's not keeping a tally. See, but this is the mistake.
I'm not keeping a tally.
Trying to okay, this one's more evil here and this one's more evil there. They both. Dan Carlin said it best. Okay, this is not a good guy versus bad guy.
I'm not saying
this is a bad guy versus bad guy. Fucking Stalin.
And those are always the hardest to tell.
Well,
exactly.
The other thing is, and I'm going to say this anyway. Screw it. If you look at COVID, okay, where neighbors could
fucking go.
Hold on, yeah. So where neighbors could call the police if they saw somebody in their neighborhood breaking the quarantine or the policies set forth,
Right.
and people were happy to do so. And one thing that I
say that, but I don't know how many people actually call those hotlines.
there are quite.
I don't know. I don't know.
All right, so
Those hotlines were atrocious and un-American as fuck.
I know.
But I don't know how many people actually called.
I
don't
read it out
know.
my mom. Just kidding.
I believe that. I believe that, you snitch.
But
Fucking snitch.
But in communist Russia and the Soviet Union, people would definitely do that to their neighbors.
Same thing in Nazi Germany.
I
Literally. Because totalitarian regimes.
I have a story
That's what
about that.
happens.
I have a story about that.
30%.
About COVID? Or
No,
about Nazi Germany? or Soviet Union?
Nazi ratting.
Let me finish real quick.
Yeah, please,
Right.
please.
It was almost like the modern day Salem witch trials. Okay, when it came to communist Russia or Soviet Union, like I got to keep changing that to Soviet Union.
Right.
People would be like, "Hey, that guy's wife's hot. If I just rat him out, they'll take him away, and I can have his wife."
Or
That's what
I haven't
happens when you
ratted
give the
anybody out.
individuals when you give individuals that amount of power over other people.
well, not
like
just
basically
that, and
police
you
power. That's what happens.
incentivize.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
humans are all about incentives.
Yeah.
When you incentivize people to act like terrible snitches, some percentage are going to act like terrible snitches. Sure.
Yep.
Until somebody
When you incentivize
and make
people
up
to act like terrible racists and Jew-hating Nazis, some of them will do it. A lot of them will do it.
sure, because they get
Look at the kind of people that rose to power in the Nazi Party, right? It was the fucking worst people.
Yep.
Look at the kind of people who rose to power in Stalin's KGB. It was the worst people, right?
Sure.
That's what gets when you give those incentives. And that's why Churchill was fucking awesome. Because what was he anti, Matt? He was anti-Nazism and anti-communism.
He called it.
And we're going to go on the record like we did
Which is
before.
why you go-
I'm pretty sure he was against pedophilia. So he was against like the three worst things. Just like we said before.
We don't have
The
any
three
proof of
worst
that,
things-
but we can probably make a safe
I'm
assumption.
just going to assume it. There's no evidence that he wasn't.
So
okay.
I'm gonna see if we can dig that up. We can do an episode on Churchill's
No,
stance on pedophilia.
Definitely not doing that.
But Matt, you had I made a statement earlier, and you said you had a question for me, and you kind of what was it? Or do
I
you
can't.
remember?
I have absolutely no idea.
It's not the one you scratched on your desk.
What context was that? What context was that?
I was going on about World War I and World War II isolationist America, and I swear you. Since I'm on that, and while Matt's thinking, we could potentially be semi-isolationist. And the reason why I think we're not is because every time, if you think about the United States military, doesn't matter if it's the Air Force, it's the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, we have the most experienced armed forces in the world.
But that's only because we're not isolationists.
I know, but that's not my point. My point is, what is the incentive for the U.S. government to have a green fighting force? There isn't one.
Right.
Right.
So you think part of the reason we're involved in all these wars overseas is to keep everybody sharp?
Yeah. And hold on.
Maybe you're right.
And
I don't know. That could be right.
hold on. Every time we give another country billions of dollars to help fight their war, Ukraine versus Russia, Israel versus Palestine, or Hamas, or Hezbollah, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
They buy our stockpiles of stuff that's sitting in mothballs.
Right.
And what happens when they buy the stuff in mothballs?
Sure.
We make the new stuff and keep it for ourselves.
So you can argue that it keeps America stronger and safer.
And you can also argue the world safer as well.
And that's possible.
If we're doing
That's
things
the
for
problem.
the right reason.
But that's the problem, right? We'll never know. That could actually be true. And that's why I don't come down as an isolationist or as a let's go conquering.
But I don't like a lot of things. I don't like the national debt. I don't like it's gone up $12 trillion.
Right, but that's a
year.
different topic for
No.
conversation.
That goes into the same spending.
It doesn't. I mean,
it goes.
it's the one legitimate thing that the federal government should spend money on is defense.
$12 trillion.
Like it's the Constitution.
Years.
Like that's what
Matt,
they spend.
did you know that? $12 trillion in 3 years.
It's $1 trillion every
I've heard
100
that.
days.
Now it is.
Yeah, right now it's $1 trillion.
Like that.
It's $1 trillion every 100 days.
Yeah, but it wasn't like that.
That is so unsustainable. It's stupid.
I know. But
unless we go conquer some rich ass places, well, that's what the Romans did.
You can't even take their money anymore. Is the thing.
Well, if you conquer it shitty, but if you conquer it right, you can, right? Like, well, if we decided, okay, no, well, I want to get on one conversation.
I bring one thing in.
I have
to bring. At the end of this, I have to tell you guys one thing that that's interesting that we're getting out of Ukraine.
Please do.
So,
anyway, you can do that now if you want.
Okay, the U.S. is taking topsoil from Ukraine.
Ooh,
yeah,
good.
That's one of the things we're exporting out of the country.
We're buying it?
Yep.
You say taking
Oh, no.
We're buying it.
It's already been paid for in
yeah, so we're buying
military equipment.
Yeah, so we're buying it.
Yeah.
That's fair.
yeah, and that's an important thing to remember. Like, people think we're just giving them
what's the
billions of
difference if
dollars.
they were selling us
They are
oil?
paying us back. They have good soil over there. They have great soil. That's
what I'm
fine,
saying. So
you
if
know?
we're buying it, that's fine. I mean, whatever. It's weird, but I mean, that's a natural resource just like oil.
It's what
just
they
you
can
didn't used
afford
to
right
be able
now,
to
right?
ship. You didn't used to be able to ship
maybe
topsoil.
we'll take
but now
someone's
you can.
topsoil that like Russia can't. They'll get there and be like, we can't take no more land. There is none left. America, we must.
That is
America.
the shittiest Russian accent I've ever heard. Scott, give us a better one. That was trash. That's like what I would have done. Let me try better. Hold on. No, I can't do it now. I got to hear Scott's first.
No, I'm not doing it now.
The Legion comrade. We
get
are
there,
out
there
of
is
soil.
no soil.
We leave and we go back and no boom boom. We cannot attack.
The Russians never wanted Ukraine.
There.
They never wanted Ukraine.
No, that's
They
the dumb
wanted-
thing to say.
They don't want Ukraine.
No, stop it.
They made their own food. They're trading oil for food. They don't give a shit about. They don't care about the bread basket.
Right, but that doesn't mean they didn't want Ukraine. They invaded it. Putin wanted it.
They cared about the naval base in Crimea. That's it. It's their only warm water naval base in the world. I'm sorry, within Russia. Everything else is cold. Baltic Sea.
No, that's interesting. But now I want to talk about what the fuck we were just saying before you started that. I wanted to say something.
We're talking about isolationism.
So
American
I think we'd be
experience,
remiss when we're talking about isolation if we didn't talk about Peter Seehan's book. So after World War II, part of the deal was America would police the oceans and keep countries from invading each other.
Yep.
In exchange for that, everybody would use the dollar. Okay, as their reserve
I didn't know
currency.
that part of it, but I stand strong on the
it was
policing the
also a
oceans
creation
thing.
of the.
It was some accords in
petro-
the 70s. I cannot remember what the hell the name
That's
of it
really
was.
interesting.
Read Peter Seehan's book. It's called "The End of the World Is Just the Beginning."
There's
Oh,
also
cool.
the creation of the petrodollar.
That sounds familiar.
Because
Because we've talked about it before.
Yeah,
Matt.
we helped install the House of Saud, who runs Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And that's what created the petrodollar.
But
the most, I'm putting that in a nutshell.
So, Peter Seehan's whole book, "The End of the World Is Just Beginning," is based on the premise that what if America stopped policing the world? Okay, because that sounds bad when you say it, like policing the world.
I say that
But
a lot.
one of the main things that we're doing by policing the world is
Protecting
stopping
trade.
piracy.
Yeah,
piracy.
protecting trade. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Protecting. Yeah,
And
I
if-
say
what
that a
if
lot.
we stop doing that?
Yep.
What happens? All of a sudden,
China would step in and they would regulate who receives goods and services
but I don't
around the
think
world.
China has the capability
They
to
don't. They
police the
don't.
world's
But
ocean.
they might fill that gap. But at the very least, it would be chaos. That is
But
a
what happens
huge,
then, Matt? Can I tell
huge
you?
thing that
One second.
America does, and
Can I have a
nobody
joke?
really takes it into
Okay.
account.
Right, exactly, Matt. Go ahead, Scott.
Somalia becomes the richest country in the world.
Look
So-
at me. I'm the president now. I'm the first world now.
What would really happen is all these other countries would start doing that shit again. So everybody used to do that shit.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But the point is, so what Peter Zeon says in his book is if that happened, then our whole world economy collapses because everything is based on maximizing
is.
economy.
It absolutely is.
Places that aren't good for growing food still survive with a higher population than they could ever have
Yeah.
because they have something else they're good at and they can trade that and the trade is safe enough that they can trade that for food and nobody starves.
Yep. So,
But if we don't
yeah.
keep the world's oceans free of pirates and keep trade moving, then all of a sudden way more people starve, and then you don't have 8 billion people.
It's huge, man. It's so like, and in a downfall, in a collapse, you withdraw the periphery the same way the Russian or the Roman Empire did during its collapse. Like they withdrew from the provinces, right? So like, if the Navy stops expending all those extra resources around the world's oceans,
right?
I mean, that is world chaos. That is starvation. That is another world power rising to prominence.
I don't think isolationism is the answer.
Or you forego your own some other huge sector in favor of that, and it just looks even weirder. It's so crazy. It's so huge.
We could stay out of other countries' wars and still police the oceans and still protect trade. But
we need to make sure those countries are stable enough.
We made in the 70s was we're not going to let we are so strong. We're not going to let other countries just go invading like they used to, because that fucks up everything. Because then you could end up in a world war.
Stability.
So we have, what you do then is you have stable, and that's why Russia invading Ukraine, really, that's the problem. It's because what is that? That's an old school territory war, which we're not supposed to have anymore. We're supposed to be done with that. Okay, but we're not. But remember, when the Soviet Union collapsed, what did they talk about? Oh, this is the end of history. But this is what people thought.
It's influenced by our government.
Oh, 100%. But that's not what I'm talking about. We're not arguing that point. What I'm saying is the real problem they have with Russia invading Ukraine is it's a return to traditional international relations of territory disputes that end in invasions. And we look at Iraq invaded Kuwait.
It's a good point.
Desert Storm, right? Desert Storm. That's not supposed to happen because America stops that, and that's what keeps everybody safe and trading with everybody.
China invades Hawaii.
No. Again, stop with this. I'm not saying Guam that they weren't picking that fight. Don't stop making that argument. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay? What I'm saying is that's the real problem with it for the powers that be, is that we don't want normal territorial wars. We want stability, and war is destabilizing. Or that's one side. The other side is we want that because we can make a lot of money.
Would you say, George, that we prefer ideological wars to territorial ones?
Well, which is funny. No, we fight ideological wars when they're really territorial wars.
That's what I'm saying.
We say they're ideological oftentimes just to make us feel better, but
we're engaged in both in Ukraine right now, are we not? It's ideological capitalism versus communism, kind of the old fight, America versus Russia. Well, it is.
It's ideological and is good versus evil.
Well,
it's the way they preach it. That's the way it's pitched.
It is the way it's pitched. Yeah,
that's the way it's pitched. I don't think that's true, but that's the way it's pitched.
Yeah.
Okay. What I was going to say, another point that I thought of, I can't remember where I heard this, what podcast it was, or what book. Somebody pointed out that America is an empire. And I always think, well, not really. And then the reasoning behind it, I thought, was just floored me because it was such a good point. Because, okay, my argument is when they say the American empire, I'm like, well, no. We had the nukes. What did we do? We didn't conquer everyone.
It doesn't have to be a physical empire.
Well, yeah, but so this is the argument that I think is better than that, Matt. He says, okay, well, America started as 13 colonies. Okay? And then what did they do? They conquered.
Yeah.
And then enveloped that into their empire. You could argue, and I think that's actually a pretty good argument, that the United States is an empire because we just expanded over the whole United States. So
that's a really interesting notion.
Think about it.
That. Yeah.
Right? Like,
so the federal government occupied. Yeah.
Well, we took it from Native Americans. We took it from Mexicans. We took it from Spanish. We took it from French. We took it from British. We fought 5 fucking different places to take all that. But it never occurred to me that we were conquering
the American
and we
empire.
Became an empire
is within
because
its
we
own
included
borders.
them in the government better than any other empire really did.
Wow.
But the Romans did that
So now let's start
by
applying all
by
the
like
rules.
1000 AD or 100 AD. Roman empires were Spanish. All right, so
Yeah.
they included those people into their system. There were
Yeah.
senators.
That's a good point.
There was
man.
emperors that were not Roman.
Yes, there were. They incorporated the provincial representatives
So that's
into their
kind of
Senate.
what we did.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we did. And I find that fascinating because I never
I
thought
love
of it
that.
like that.
Let's
I
do
never thought of it
Yeah.
like that.
Now
Because
let's
to
start
me-
applying all the rules of
well-
empire to America as
So
contained
it's like
within
if you were
its own
born
borders.
exactly, but if you were born in Rome, in the Roman Empire, in Spain, in 300 AD, you probably didn't think of them as conquerors, and you were part of their. You probably thought of them as part of your empire because that's the word they all used. But it would be any different than Texas or New Mexico does
Yeah,
now.
And there's still
It's just
resistant
another
portions.
part of the government.
Yeah, there's still
just
resistant
another
portions
part of the nation.
of literally the United States who are like semi-cessationist. You know what I mean? Like Alaska and Texas, and they're like, "Why do we need you guys?" You know?
Yeah. It's just an interesting way to
Interesting.
think
It
about
is
it.
really cool concept.
I found
like
that. I can't remember where I heard that. I really wish I could remember where I heard that. But whoever pointed that out, I was like, "Oh
Let's
shit! I
follow
never
up
thought
on
about that at all."
I'd love to talk about that more.
Yeah, think about. It might have been in. Anyway, okay. So the other point I want to talk about is Lex Freeman's podcast with the communist.
Mm-hmm.
I would be remiss if I didn't point out that they kind of discussed the similar. The discussion we've had today, they had a similar one in about 3 minutes of part of that podcast, where the historian pointed out faults with Daryl Cooper's logic, and then they kind of went on from there. But Lex points out the same thing that I had thought before, and that I made that point here, is that we can think about the past with nuance and also have that nuance today. Just because Churchill was right doesn't mean Putin is a Nazi or Putin is Hitler. There's nuance there. We shouldn't use these myths or these legends of the past or these stories from the past to justify things that are not accurate today. And Lex said it in a more articulate manner than I just did. But that's what he was pointing out. It was the same thing I thought, is like they're identifying a correct problem that is happening now. But the way they're attacking that problem is by attacking the past incorrectly. And I think that there's no need. There's no need to do that. We have nuance. Just point out now that Putin is not Hitler. Point out now that not everything is World War II, and not everybody that doesn't want to go to war is Chamberlain. And that's one of the things that I, after listening to Blueprint from Armageddon, we've talked about this, I came away with much more sympathy for Neville Chamberlain than I used to. I used to be, appeasement is so stupid. And then you read and you listen to Blueprint from Armageddon and you read more about World War I, and you're like, I get it.
We picked these people up at the beginning of the Second World War, or just prior to it, with all the atrocities and all the consequences of that.
Right.
We've broken down some of the steps that could have been taken to mitigate those consequences in the course of this conversation, but there was a vast amount of history prior to that.
Yeah,
and
man.
It is all and just contained within the First World War, and the circumstances during that time and which led up to it are absolutely necessary to be taken into account when thinking of these people's mindsets when they're dealing with these people and evaluating these threats and their experiences and what they
Is context,
they
not
literally had
justification.
just had the worst war in world history, where it was like, oh, you want to obliterate 1 million guys in 3 days? Okay, load up the artillery shells. It was a whole new type of warfare. So the world was changing. Yeah, it was the apocalypse. It absolutely was the apocalypse.
World War I was the apocalypse. Okay,
Yeah.
So Chamberlain bending over backwards to try to avoid that is much more understandable. And to me, what I come away with out of that is more of a respect for Churchill. Because even though it was that bad, he still understood how bad Hitler was.
And perhaps we can sum all this up. We can collate all this with the isolationism, and on a positive note for Churchill by saying that Neville Chamberlain thought as an isolationist and was only thinking of the capabilities of British power at that time as its own resource, and in the aftermath of the First World War, without the Allies, okay? Whereas Churchill saw the power of an Allied coalition and said, together we can stop this thing.
Right. That's a great point. And also, another point is Churchill put Chamberlain in his cabinet.
Yeah, it's a conciliation.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe he valued
that's a good point, yeah.
the experience there.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. But I would argue that after seeing what World War I was like, or reading about that and learning more, I think the thing that I take away from that is empathy for somebody like Chamberlain being unwilling to force the issue.
I like that.
Because
I'm glad to hear that
was
in this
World War
conversation.
I terrible.
I'm glad to hear some a different. Let's get a different perspective on all these people. Like, that's all I want. I want the World War II story from the Germans.
Yep.
There's a great series, and I meant to look it up.
Absolutely. There's no reason why we shouldn't have it from a German perspective.
Yeah.
That's the problem. When we have these things that are taboo, right? We can't think about it from the Germans' perspective because they were evil. Well, that's dumb. Mm-hmm. Even if some people there were evil, that doesn't mean we can't try to understand them. Mm-hmm. That's stupid. Because evil lies in every human.
And thank you for saying some of, because
it wasn't all of them.
Yeah, and
that's silly to think.
It was like Germany all of a sudden became demonic and went back to being normal. No, there were stories all along the way. And how did it happen?
Right.
In the
but then
how,
also
in the
some
hard
of them
how
were kind of swept up in that too. That's why it's so hard.
You covered that by the incentives for the power of government and informing on your people.
Hey man, this felt good to get back at it. It's been a while.
Heck yes.
All right.
Thank you
everybody. If you're still listening, we really appreciate you tuning in. Matt, thanks again for jumping in with us on this. I'm glad we took our time since the podcast came out with Daryl Cooper and Tucker to really break it down. I wanted to bring a little more nuance and long form discussion on this because I haven't heard anybody that really articulated the points that I thought we need to make. And I really appreciate you joining us, Matt.
My pleasure.
Everybody check the descriptions for a link to the podcast that we're talking about, and also for Lex's podcast with the historian. No, he's a historian of communism. Sure. Man, Scott, that guy is smart. And it's a great breakdown. I learned a lot from listening to his talk with Lex. And Lex is getting so good at interviewing. You'll like him much better. Also, we're going to do a new episode. I'm going to commit right now, Scott, next week. Okay. All right, we'll have a new episode coming out next week. We're going old school. We're talking about the hardcore history episode, Punic Nightmares, old school style. All right, where we're going to break down our thoughts. I have some super relevant thoughts about Punic Nightmares. I can't wait to jump in. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening. Matt, again, thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.